Hi everyone, it's Shirley here. I'm back with part 2 of the Perfectly Pieced Project box from Yvette Renee Creations, the Halloween Foundation Paper Piece banner from 2021. And what I'm going to do right now is I just need to go through a few housekeeping items, and one is when I posted the video on YouTube, my first one, with the sewing instructions, I noticed that the volume was a bit low on the video. So I've changed one of my settings, and I hope that that cures that problem. Okay, in the last video I worked on AS from page 27, and the completed block is here, and I've left my paper on the back. We're now going to be going on to AR from page 27, and the pattern pieces that we're going to be using are on page 22, and we're going to be working with AR 1, 2, and 3, and it is the Boo Block bottom. One other thing is the pattern pieces and everything that I used for this, I've placed everything in a little bag, so if I want to do the project again, I can just take out my pieces and I'm ready to go. So I'm just going to set that off to the side in my little envelope, plastic envelope that I have here, and put that off to the side. And I'm now going to be showing you sections for AR. Okay, so what I've done is I have the page 22 from the pattern booklet, and that is our piecing patterns for the AR section. What I did was I made 2 copies, and just on plain printer paper. So when I made the copies, I used one, and for this section, I am not going to be using the freezer paper. I am going to be using my copy paper. So I made 2 copies. The first copy is going to be my piecing pattern. The second copy is going to be for my cutting of my fabric pieces. Get these in order here. Now, if you've watched the first video, you will be able to refer back to that, how I cut my pattern pieces. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is make sure I have these in order number, so when I go to the sewing machine, I can just pick up my pattern pieces and just stitch along. So with my piecing pattern that I'm going to be sewing with is I am just going to take and just use my 1/4 ruler here and get my rotary cutter that I use for cutting paper, and I'm just going to line up my 1/4, placing that 1/4 inch line, the little lip line, right along the edge of my pattern. I'm going to leave about 1/4 inch all the way around on this piece. So I'm just going to cut out, leaving a little bit on the edge. And cut that out. Remember, if you have any questions, please leave them in the comment section below the video. This block is very, very easy because it's all in white. I didn't have to color anything in, so I don't need a color copy. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to fold along my stitching lines. So line up the edge of my ruler right along that black stitching line. And just fold in my crease just like I did before with the other pattern pieces. And now my pattern piece is ready to be stitched. I have my fabrics all cut, and I can just set this aside now, and my paper from the booklet, and I'll be working with these two pieces. I'll get set up at the sewing machine and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm set up at the cutting area here, and I have my AR pattern, stitching pattern piece, and I have my fabric cutting pieces here, and I'm all ready to stitch this together. So what I'm going to do first is I'm taking AR section right here, and I'm going to turn it over, and I'm going to take my AR fabric pieces, and what I'm going to do is take a glue stick, because I'm not working with the freezer paper, so I'm going to take my glue stick and I'm just going to put some glue stick on my pattern piecing, and I'm putting it right in behind section AR1. Now what I'm going to do is, remember, I've cut my fabric with the wrong side up, so on my fabric I am just going to run a bit of glue stick along there. I find if I put glue stick on both the pattern piece and my fabric, it seems to stick a little bit better. So now I'm just going to fold this back so I know that I'm going to get it in the right place. I'm going to place my fabric down on my pattern piece, and just with my hands I'm just going to press that into place, and I'm going to make sure that I have enough off of the edge there. Get this straight here. Okay, so it's now in position, and I know some people say that if you press the fabric to the paper after putting the glue stick on, it's supposed to stick. Well, I tried that and it didn't work for me, so we're just going to go ahead with this. So when I'm looking at this, I now see that I have my stitching line on the outside, and then my cutting for this section on the outside, and I have extra fabric and paper on the outside. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold back section AR2 and 3 and move those out of the way so I don't end up cutting them. And I'm going to take my 1/4 ruler, and I'm going to, again, like I did in the other video, I'm going to place it on with the lip of the 1/4" ruler against the folded edge of my piecing pattern. And if I can find my rotary cutter, there we are. I'm going to cut along the edge and trim off the excess fabric. Okay, so now after we've done that, we're going to take AR2, and again remember that this is the wrong side of the fabric, so I'm going to take my pin out, set my pattern piece to the side, and take AR2 and place it right sides together, matching my cut edges along the edge. Turn it over, and my cut edges are aligned there, and I have lots of fabric on the side. So now what I'm going to do is again, like I did in the first video, I'm going to stitch right along that folded edge of my piecing pattern. And what I can show you is if you are going to stitch through the paper, you will just fold this back and stitch through the paper. Okay, that's in position. I'm now going to take it to the sewing machine and stitch that up. Okay, I'm back at the sewing machine now, and one thing I neglected to tell you is what weight and type of thread I'm using to do this project. I am using, from Wonderfill, I am using an 80 weight Decabob in just plain white. And again, I am using a Schmetz Microtex Chrome Needle 8012. And I am going to be stitching with a 1.5 stitch length, and I am using my FAF Creative 4.5. Again, the foot is a stitch in the ditch foot with the little metal guide, and that I'm just going to place along the edge of the fold and go ahead and stitch that seam down. I just have my thread caught here. I'm just going to flip that out, and I do hold my threads just off to the side so they don't get pulled down into the machine, the hole where my needle goes down. I just hold them off to the side, and that usually prevents the needle from pushing the fabric and everything down into that hole. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and stitch. I'm just going to stitch slow. I'm going to stitch slow here because my camera is attached to the table that my sewing machine is on. And I've stitched right off the end. And I'm going to trim my threads. And again, I have my little thread bucket here off to the side. So now what I'm going to do is take this over to the pressing area, and I'm going to be pressing my seams, and so I'll take you over there and I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back at the pressing area, and what I'm going to do before I do anything else is I am just going to take a pin and I'm going to fold back my AR2, and I'm going to just put a pin right in this section right here. Because I'm not using freezer paper, I'm a little concerned that this piece might not stick to my stitching pattern. So I'm just going to put a pin in there just so it stays. If I was using freezer paper, I know it would be on there securely. So now I'm just going to fold that back, and with my water brush, again, I'm just going to, while I have the cap on, I'm just going to press and give it a squeeze so the water comes down into the tip, and I am going to run that brush right along that seam line. And remember, you don't want it saturated. You just want to be able to feel that it's lightly damp. Now I'm going to fold AR2 into finished position, run my finger along that seam line, making sure I'm pressing it out so I don't have any folds. Just run the tip of my finger along that seam, and then take it to my iron and just press. Now like I said, if I was using freezer paper, this would be adhered to the pattern piece, but because I'm not using freezer paper, I am now going to just take and use a glue stick, and I did purchase some glue stick from Staples, and remember, it's washable, acid-free, and non-toxic. And I'm just going to put a bit of glue on my paper, and then just a little bit along my fabric. Put that into position, press it down, and that should keep it in place so I can do my next section. So we're looking at the fabric side. I'm going to fold it over and look at my paper piecing side. We've completed AR1 and AR2. We're now going to be working on section AR3. We're going to fold our piecing pattern back along that stitching line. Use our add a quarter ruler and trim a 1/4 of an inch away from the fold. Okay, now I'm going to take my AR3, and again, remember, I cut it so that the wrong side was up. Take that. Now I'm going to place right sides together. Now I know the white is going to be really hard to see, but I'm just lining up my cut edges, and I'm going to be taking that now to the sewing machine and stitching again right along that folded edge between AR2 and AR3. Go to the sewing machine and I'll stitch that up. I'm ready to stitch down that seam. So now what I'm going to do is, again, just like I did before, I'm going to line up the edge of my guide right along the folded edge of that paper. Stitch right off the end and trim our threads. And now we're going back to the cutting table and finish off our block. I'm back at the cutting table. I'm going to take my pin out, and what I'm going to do then is just take my water brush, run it along that seam, and finger press, and I'm only going to give this a light press because I'm going to have to turn that seam in the opposite direction. So I'm just going to give this a light press. And now I have to trim along that cut edge, and that cut edge is the dotted line. Trim that off. And do the same for the other two edges. Okay, now I can take my paper off. I'm going to position this piece, and by using the glue stick, sometimes the paper sticks to my fabric. And it's not a serious problem, but when I use the freezer paper, I don't have that problem. Okay, so I'm going to now refer to my pattern, and we're attaching AR to AS. So set that off to the side, get my AS, take the freezer paper off the back, and now placing right sides together, we want to be stitching along the purple line, so I'm going to place right sides together, check my seams, and as you notice on here, these two seams are going in the same direction. So I'm going to go to take this to the iron, and I'm going to press this seam back so my seams are nesting, and this one is nesting. I hope you can see that. So now I'm just going to go to the iron and run my water brush along that seam again, just to moisten it. Carefully fold that seam back. Give it a bit of a finger press, and now I'm going to turn it to the right side. And just give it another little press, making sure that seam is staying in the direction I want it. And press it with my iron. I'm trying not to stretch the fabric. I'm just trying to make sure that my seams are laying flat. Okay, now we can go ahead and place our pieces together, and they are going to nest. So I'm going to place this just like the picture shows. Place this like the picture shows. Put my pieces together and take my add a quarter ruler, and with a friction pen right here there is a little X where my stitches are, and I just want to make sure that I'm stitching right along that edge. So I'm going to just draw my seam. Okay, just nest those seams together. Make sure they're nice and together. And line up my cut edges at the edge, put a pin in, and now I can take that to the sewing machine and stitch that together. Okay, back at the sewing machine, and I'm going to be needing my little stylus, or my pokey tool is what I call it, or you can even use a seam ripper. This is a larger seam ripper, and you can use the point of that to hold your seams down. So now I'm going to line up my little guide right along that line that I drew, and I'm going to start off the edge and stitch all the way down. When I come to this section right here, I'm going to make sure that I am stitching just one thread width or whatever away from that X, so that I don't lose any of my points. Coming to that section now. Remove my pins. I don't sew over pins, making sure my seams are laying flat. And stitching right off the edge. Trim my threads, and now we're going back to the cutting table. Okay, we've stitched up that seam, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take it to the iron and just press that seam right along the stitching line. That'll remove my friction pen marks. And now I am going to fold this into the finished position, and my fabric and my seams want to lay away from my purple piece. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fold this back, use my water brush again, Just run my water brush along there, make sure it's just a little bit damp. And now fold this back. Just do a little finger press. And then take it to the iron. And press that into the finished position. Okay, we have AS and ASR finished. And there we are. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set this aside, and we're going to be going on to the next section, which I am going to be showing you AC and AB. The other thing that I forgot to tell you is if you don't have a 1/4-inch ruler, you can use your regular ruler, just making sure that you line up the 1/4-inch line along your stitching line. Okay, set everything off to the side, do a bit of cleaning up, and I'll be back to show you AC and AB. Okay, we're going to be working on this section right now because we have completed AS and AR. I'm going to set that off to the side. Now, for AB, we're going to be working with, I have my copy from my pattern booklet. For my paper piecing method, remember again, I traced that from my pattern booklet on page 18. And I've colored in my areas again so it matches this. And again, what I did was I took and photocopied or just made one copy of this 100%. I referred to everything and colored it in the same way I did for my AS block. Then what I did, set that off to the side. I again used this to make a color copy, or you can use this, but I made a color copy of this, and I used that to cut apart my pattern pieces. And then again, just like I did in the previous tutorial, I cut everything the same. I've gone ahead and used the same method to stitch this as I did this. I have this block completed, and I've done that off camera. And here it is. This is my section here. Now, after you have your section complete and this section complete, you will notice, and I'm not sure why, but it just is, but I have those completed exactly like is on the page. And what I noticed is that this section is larger than this section. So if you look at your blocks here, that is the way they're going to be oriented on the finished project, and this is this. But when I put the two together, you might not be able to see that, but one is larger than the other. I'll move this piece out of the way. And when I line them up, you can see one of these blocks is larger than the other. So just remember that they're not the same size. And that's the way they come out when you stitch them together. You've done nothing wrong. That's the way the pattern is. Okay? I am going to set my pieces off to the side. And the sections that we've done, again, I'm just going to refer you to this area right here. And what we're looking at right here is this bottom section corresponds to this section right in here, just under the boo there, and this one corresponds to this section right in here. Okay, so that's it for this video, and remember, if you like the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel. Any comments or questions, leave them in the comment section below the video, and I'll be back in the next video.